a very good afternoon and good evening to all our participants that have joined us today. I'm Noel, your host for today's interesting session. It gives me great pleasure to inform all those who've joined the session for the very first time that Monster APAC and Middle East is now founded. Well, it's the session 15. So before I get ahead into the session, I've already given you guys a hint. Well, RecRoute, it is an initiative by foundit, formerly Monster APAC and ME, to connect CEOs, CHROs, and leaders in the HR and talent acquisition space with the HR and TA professionals through a series of webinar sessions. Well, before we get into the topic, it's a very, very interesting topic for today. And let me talk to you about that. Talent acquisition today is not limited to sourcing, screening, and having the right talent. Talent acquisition is a long-term HR strategy aimed at aligning to companies' long and short-term goals as well. This means talent acquisition must play a strategic role and should go beyond the obvious. Well, to talk more about this topic, today we have with us Dr. Sujaya Banerjee, CEO, Capstone People Consulting. Well, we'd like to talk about the speaker for today. Dr. Sujaya Banerjee is a serial entrepreneur and also has nurtured multiple new age learning platforms. She is the CEO of Capstone People Consulting, a leading consulting firm engaged in managing organizational transformation and high performance through leadership development. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also high performance through leadership development and innovation mindsets to help clients create workplaces to the future as well. Dr. Banerjee has over 3 decades of experience in leading change through people in organizations like British Gas, SR Group, Godrej, and AGC Network. She is a TEDx speaker and is a part of Harvard's Learning and Innovation Lab, while also teaching leadership and change management across numerous countries. Well, there is one more surprise to this session too. We also have our co-host today, Yogesh G. Krishna, and then he's the Director of Product and Marketing Lead Management of foundit. Well, Yogesh, over to you. Thank you so much for joining with us, and we look forward to an action-packed session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noel. Really love the introduction that you gave over there. Today, we are going to have a very, very interesting session in terms of what we're going to cover as we start addressing what are some of the strategic ways in which recruiters can be more relevant in the market and really raise their profile in their organizations. But before we get there, I think I did want to talk about foundit just a little bit. As Noel mentioned, we are formerly known as Monster APAC and Middle East, and we went through a rebrand exercise in November. We continue to be a premier job search engine for job seekers and a portal where recruiters such as yourselves are able to source candidates effectively. With over 70 million odd profiles in our database, I'm sure that you'll agree with me that there's a great set of candidates out there. And as recruiters, as you start reaching into your networks and looking for the next great hire, foundit would be a great choice for you. So, Sujaya, just as we get started, right? So in terms of some of the context, we are hearing a lot of interesting news that's coming out. Some of it a little bit dire, and some of it a little bit concerning with all the layoffs that are happening, all of the churn and all of the uncertainty that's there, especially with an impending recession that's on. So how do you see the profession of talent associates, talent acquisition professionals, really adapting to this environment and changing how they work, how they think, and how they conduct their day-to-day and be more relevant to the organization at large?
Right. So first of all, right at the start, thank you, Mukesh, for that introduction, and thank you, Yogesh, for inviting me to talk to your audiences today. I think these are very interesting times in which to have a conversation around how do we really sort of recast, revamp the talent acquisition function. And, you've started with the mother of all topics, which is really, the whole space around job losses that we're experiencing at this time. which kind of takes you back to the drawing board and must take you back to the drawing board in terms of what your employer value propositions would be in changing times of turmoil, where there could be part of this recasting and reinventing and rediscovering how it is that you want to run the business can lead to some very difficult decisions around talent. And so, I think my answer is going to be in two parts. Is A, which is generic in the context of anyone who's going out to hire talent in these times, and B, for organizations that have reduced talent or reduced headcount in the last 3-4 years, and have had the sort of waxing and waning of requirements in terms of talent, and how do you really go back and build the promise again. So I want to start by being able to say that when you call your function talent acquisition and not just recruitment, because recruitment and talent acquisition is not the same. So recruitment is your activities, your operational activity of being able to look at how you want to go about filling the open positions that you have. So it's kind of more operational in nature. It's about the act of being able to go out and find the right kind of talent to be able to bring them into the organization. And so I know that we have interchangeably called the recruitment function talent acquisition and so on. And I want to make that distinction right at the start so that we're able to understand what we really mean when we talk about talent acquisition. And so I'm going to urge people who are on this call to be able to take away a few keywords for reflection when we talk about what indeed is talent acquisition. And so the talent acquisition function has the following subcomponents, and this is not a masterclass on unbundling talent acquisition, but so that we can have a perspective that's common before we actually kind of go into other questions that you're going to dive deeper into. So the talent acquisition function is almost the next step to the starting point of your entire talent value chain within the organization, which actually needs to start with workforce planning. And unfortunately, this is where it comes apart, that in a lot of organizations, you don't have a strategic workforce planning function, which means that you have estimated what it is that you're trying to achieve in the coming performance years. And you have an estimation along with your strategy for the business to be able to have a clarity on how many people you would require, what kind of skill sets would those people require to bring in, how are you going to build in your talent pipelines, what are the kind of unique skill sets that you believe can only be brought in laterally into the organization. Because your organization is a live, thriving organization with people, who are the people who you already have? What are the skill sets you already have within the organization? You're doing well with that. And what is the new kind of skill sets you need to infuse into the organization? If you have the time, then you build those talent pipelines. And if you don't, then you buy those talent pipelines. And to have clarity around how you're going about this. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the talent TA or recruitment professionals get brought in much later in the game and are not part of these strategic discussions within the organization, in case there are such strategic discussions. By and large, these are reactive processes within the organization to say, all right, we've decided to hire X numbers of people, and the kind of backgrounds that we're looking at, let the recruitment folks run in different directions to go find these people for us. And sometimes there is a strategy in terms of how we are going to go out and get this talent, which are the best places to be able to find this talent in. What has historically been your experience in bringing this talent into the organization? I'm going to underline that. What has been historically your experience with bringing in that talent, which means which kind of talent do you struggle to retain within the organization? What are the reasons for why you struggle to retain them? Do you have a value proposition for each of the talent groups that you're looking to be able to bring into the organization? If yes, does the recruitment person know what that value proposition might really be, right? Overarchingly, how are you positioning your employer brand in the market, and why should anyone come in to work for you? Is there a narrative or a boilerplate or an elevator pitch that you have to be able to describe who you are? What function are you hiring for? What does that function really do for your organization? And why should anyone come in to make their career with your organization? No matter how big your brand, I recommend strongly that you have the humility to be able to underline these elements, because if you haven't taken the effort to underline these elements, unfortunately, what you're doing in the market is suboptimal to who it is that you can actually attract to your organization. So basically, when I say, do Do you understand what is your value proposition? What I mean is, what does your organization really stand for? Basically, we have a very engaging environment, or we are a great place to work. And I don't mean anything for the brand great place to work, and I'm saying it more generically. Or whether you want to say, well, we have, we are day one or day zero company on most campuses and the rest. I think a lot of organizations may fall in some of those descriptors that you're using. So what is your unique value proposition? Why should anyone work for you? What kind of data do you have about the organization and its performance that can make it attractive for anyone to come in to join your organization? Do you spend time talking about this? And no matter how big your brand, you have the humility to say that other than what I've just told you about the organization, why don't I send you some more material so that you can take a look at the organization, the job description, what it is that we're trying to basically do here. So what I'm asking everyone to do is, there's a beautiful book called As a Man Thinketh, right? It's a James Allen book. I recommend everyone reads that. And it's got an absolutely beautiful poem, which talks about how you can, drop your ego and wear the servant's hat, which really means that when you come in to be able to offer people jobs, rather than to be able to imagine that you're in a space of power where you have the jobs to offer, and this is how we pay, and we pay top dollars. And so if we shortlist you, we let you know. If you're up to the mark, we let you know. If we shortlisted you or we met you, we've done you a huge favor because it's such a big brand that has invited you for an interview. My strong recommendation is to be able to wear that servant hat, and to be able to understand that when you go out to hire talent, you're serving both your organization and its brand, and you're serving the potential talent that is applying to your organization. So a very large part of this exercise is also how you speak to and how you treat people who you may not end up hiring for the organization or may not get shortlisted in your journey. But I'm starting with the strategic focus on understanding and how many people really understand what the workforce plan is. And I know that in the times we exist in, this workforce plan cannot be etched in stone. It needs to continuously evolve depending on what the organization's requirements might be, how you're basically, it's got to reflect how agile your organization is with strategy and with what it is that it's going to be doing differently in the market. And accordingly, your requirement might really change. And then therefore, when you view it as a more strategic function, and you're doing talent acquisition vis-a-vis recruitment, then you spend time to be able to understand where you're going to go out, what kind of people do you really need, what is your value proposition, and how can you position yourself in a manner where you are hiring for the long term and not for the short term. I'm afraid in the way in which we conduct this activity itself, what oftentimes are giveaways is how unsustainable you expect the talent to really be. And the fact that there isn't anything so tedious about who we hire. Anyone can make the bar, and, basically by and large, we're not very serious about the process. And I'm saying that I'm afraid I have to call this out, because oftentimes this is the feedback that we get from employees, from the market. I run to not-for-profits which have significant number of people, from various organizations as members. And it's not uncommon for us to be able to have a feedback around how this entire process really manifests in the market. I'm going to also put a pause to what extent do we really go in, especially in the current times, to what extent do we spend time to be able to understand not just what kind of talent we want and where are they likely to be available, and are we building talent or are we buying talent, and all those decisions. You now have a plethora of options on how it is that this talent is going to engage with your organization. And what I mean by that is this a full-time job? Is this someone you can get on a gig basis? Is this an in-source job? Is this an outsourced job? Is this person going to be off roles? Is this group of people different from the kind of people who you normally bring full-time on your roles? Are these discussions happening? And are you involved in those discussions to be able to contribute on what other options do you have in the way in which you can bring in this talent? And if it's not the recruiter directly, then at the next levels is someone engaging in this conversation to be able to bring in the strategic focus to the requisitioner to understand that there are multitudes of opportunities to be able to bring in talent. In most of the organizations that I worked for, our precondition for any talent being even put out into the market was whether we had run through both the IJP and looked at our high potential employees within the organization to be able to re-ascertain that the talent we were looking for was indeed available right under our nose, and that we were going out in the market to look for this. The problem with bringing talent in from outside is that, and I'll tell you the upside in a minute, and I know a lot of you have the upsides for why you should bring in talent from outside. The downside of bringing talent in from outside is that they upset your salary scales very significantly when you bring them in, and that kind of creates a whole host of turmoil. Again, you will constantly have people inside the organization complaining that their career development planning or career advancement and growth is not manifesting despite all the lip service that they hear inside the organization. So this is the other point I wanted to make, which is that in many organizations, the career development team or the learning teams are not speaking to the teams in talent acquisition. And this has got to be an integrated mesh, really, in terms of how it is that you're looking at talent when you go out to be able to get them. Now, while I'm talking about all these processes, I'm not by any means suggesting that you take your own sweet time to be able to even figure whether you do indeed need this person and where do you get them from. This needs to be a really, really speedy process, but there's a difference between being speedy and being, and compromising processes for the sake of expediency. And unfortunately, I find most organizations are more expedient than they are speedy with what it is that they're doing to be able to bring in high quality talent. Now, let me explain the difference. When you say expediency, it means I need this person from day before yesterday. Just go out there and get it. And you can have line managers push you really hard saying, listen, I don't think this talent is inside the organization. Please don't waste time. Go out there and get people. And I'm not up for investing in people who might come here on rotation, or you give me some headcount, which is going to waste my time. And I don't have the time to be able to train up anyone, bring this person in. And with what I'm saying there, I'm hitting upon a huge challenge that we have within organizations, which is not wanting to invest in the delta of grooming. And because the same holds true even when you bring in, lateral talent into the organization, I find we always compromise on this. In fact, lateral talent in most organizations gets treated with the least amount of compassion because they're being paid whatever yet you're paying them to be able to come in, and they already come in with experience. The general orientation is, well, come in here and show us your dance. It takes me to another favorite topic, which is that the entire process of onboarding in an organization, and everyone says, yes, of course. Yeah, we have an onboarding process and we have a great onboarding process. We won an award for onboarding processes and so on. And I want to try and give you what we mean by onboarding when we're talking about talent. It's not the forms and the formalities that you're asking people to fill. I've seen people excitedly saying, oh, we do all of that even before people come in on board. And that's great because you must get it out of the way. But the onboarding we're actually talking about is the onboarding for them to understand what it means to perform in your environment. As simple as that. Take down some of these questions. What does it mean to succeed in our environment? Right? What is the manager's expectation from this role? Whoever that manager may be, sometimes it may be the CEO. What is that person's expectation from this role, right? What are the existing company-wide OKRs or goals that the organization already has that is going to impact this individual's performance within the organization? Who's going to help this individual get clarity no matter which part of the year this person's joining? Who constitutes this person's team, and what is the kind of profile of these people? And I mean the talent profile of these people, and who out of the people that this person will be leading can pose as retention challenges. And therefore, what strategies can this person adopt so that this transition of a new manager does not create the gap to be able to lose crucial talent within the team? I'm afraid a lot of these conversations don't happen in most organizations. And onboarding is supposed to be some slipshod process for 1 or 2 days. And then the person is supposed to just jump in and show everyone their dance. Providing the person with a buddy who can actually, or somebody who's senior, who can help this person understand the culture and succeed. this is often left to the HR head. And I'm afraid while it's great to have the HR in charge of so many important dimensions of succeeding, talent is owned, must be owned across the board by many, many people within the organization, especially the leadership team. So how do you actually integrate this talent into the organization to be able to succeed? And the more the senior level at which you're laterally hiring, this responsibility goes up dramatically. I also mean understanding what is the culture, how do you seek approvals within the organization, what is the power structure within the organization, not just how work is distributed, but what is the power structure within the organization, which kind of stakeholders will this person need to manage. All of that, these are conversations to be had when we talk about onboarding, not the forms that you're asking people to fill or some kit that you're giving them, which is all great. But what are you actually doing to create connections with the new talent that's actually coming into the organization? And I believe that the latter needs a lot of work within most organizations, and most organizations don't even have the process for the latter. So I think in the context that, you just presented, Yogesh, I want to go back to the piece on, especially in an environment where, of impending recession or tough company decisions to become more profitable and the rest of that, and huge pressures to be able to reduce cost. It's unfortunate to have to reduce headcount, but that's the reality of the times that we exist in. I think it's very, very important for anyone managing talent, not just the people who are going out in the market to hire talent, for anyone who's going to be hiring talent to be able to play it straight with people who come in on board, which is you must have an elevator pitch on how you're going to, especially if you've had job losses in the last 3 years, is how are you going to explain this to a potential employee? And it cannot be a question you skip. It cannot be something you avoid. It should be something that you take on head on to be able to explain the realities of your business and why it is that you needed to do what you've done and why it is that you're out in the market again hiring. For those who have not had that experience and are yet wanting to deal particularly with people who already experienced job loss, it's your job to reassure them that this opportunity is real, that the organization is seeking to be able to add them on, that the organization has huge, it's important to be able to let them know that the organization is committed to employees and their well-being, and that by and large, even when it's not possible to continue the relationship, this organization plays it straight and helps employees to be able to transition this. And I'm saying that you're going to have to deal with this question. This is not a question you can run away from. If you can avoid this question, you can't be, sort of circumventing it to say, oh, but that never happens in our organization kind of thing. I think you need to have a well-considered response to this question, and you can decide that inside your organization with your own leadership on how it is that you want to be able to deal with the question of longevity of employment. The truth is that you don't know what the longevity of employment might really be for anyone that you're bringing in. But the fact that you play it fair, or that the organization has enough moral intelligence to play it straight, is what people are actually looking for. And I'm afraid if it's not an impending challenge, or it's not something that your organization has had to handle in the last few years, you may well not get the question. But I still believe that you must be ready with a response for anyone who tries asking you questions around this, because the truth is that when for most organizations that have reduced headcount, the last in, first out is the big risk that most employees are up against when they come in. There's of course been people with long tenures as well who've left the organizations, but who've been asked to leave organizations. But when you're last in, first out, you're running the risk of leaving a job that you already have because you believe in the promise, and the promise may well not be sustained. And so therefore the question on, and I think there is a fair amount of insecurity right now within certain pockets on whether I want to let go of what I have. And maybe there's less experimentation, especially on the back of all these layoffs that we've been kind of experiencing. So I want to leave this part of your question, Yogesh, with just simply saying that when you offer people a job, you're actually offering them a promise. And it's a promise you're making on behalf of your employer brand. And it's important that you're honest about this promise. These are times of moral intelligence, which means that you can no more say fancy things about yourself and your brand on your websites and just expect to get away with it. You will be held accountable. You will need to answer, respond to what you say you are and who you really stand for. and to what extent you really have the capacity and the intention to be able to fulfill the promises that we're making to people when we bring them on board. So I think I'm just going to leave you with some of these thoughts, and they're well worth taking back to some of the decision makers within your organization to be able to go back to the drawing board to decide how you want to position yourself, your brand, and your promise when you go out to hire people in the market.
Great. Thanks for that, Dr. Banerjee. This definitely is a lot to unpack there. What I really found interesting is what you're saying about how the TA teams really need to get beyond the mentality of finding someone and transferring those CVs to the hiring manager or to the line manager, right?
Yeah.
And while on most days, a typical day would be where the TA teams are looking for folks. They're calling up candidates. They're setting up interviews. All that is pretty much required on a daily basis. But then, what does it really mean for them to be more strategic? And what does it mean for professionals in their roles then and there to really become more strategic and start creating change in their organizations? Because as we hear it, the primary job of somebody who's in TA is not just to hire, but it's to drive retention. How do you get those people to stay on as long as they can, despite all the negative news that might have happened in the past? Love to hear your views on the changing role of the TA and how they're actually making it strategic and what it means.
Right. So I think we spoke a bit about this, but I want to be able to say that, look, either you can crush this role and make it into an order taker, coordinator kind of a job, which means I need so many of these people and so many of that kind of profile and so on. And then I go out and transfer this to someone who's going to help me find it, or even look at a platform like Foundit and try and see whether they can help me get some profiles. And I think that while that coordination is invaluable, it can't be the only part of your job. And that's why I was saying that you need to expand what it is that you contribute within the organization. I think an easy way out is to be able to say, well, I'm not part of a lot of the discussions, or I don't get included when certain discussions happen. And I think a lot of this has got to do with your own individual curiosity to go out and ask questions, which will get even the organization to start thinking about things differently. So I'm going to urge you that you ask for memberships in some of these conversations that are happening within the organization so that you know more rather than just coordinate. And the other part being that ask questions. I mean, I don't think there's no penalty on asking questions within the organization. So ask as many questions as you can. I want to give you a story, and it's a personal experience, and it's a very interesting one. And I'm hoping it will bring to life what I want to say when I talk about how powerful your role is in TA in terms of being able to define whether or not the organization achieves its business plan or its strategy. I mean, you're actually right there to provide the people who are going to convert that strategy into action. And I think it's important for you to be able to start seeing your roles like that, which is if you didn't do what you were doing, we could all have fancy strategies, but they're not going to be manifested because there are no people or the right kind of people to be able to do that. So I think increasingly in a competitive environment, and especially as all organizations are gearing up for recovery post the upheaval that we saw in the last 3 years, I think you are best poised to be able to make that tipping point difference within an organization, or whether or not the organization can become differentiated in what it offers, whether the organization can bring in the right kind of people who can manifest innovation, whether the organization can actually bring in people who can start these other lines of businesses that the organizations are looking at. I mean, all of that can get enabled if you find them the right kind of people. And so I want to start by telling you that you play a significantly important role within the organization. And you're right there at the center between your strategy and your strategy execution. You're right at the center of that to be able to get the people to enable the execution. But let me give you the story, right? So, this goes back to a time when I was chief talent officer for a very large conglomerate. And we had, a large internal audit function. And for years, the way this internal audit function had been run, and I want you to be able to underline some keywords when I'm actually telling you the story, right? For years, and underline that, for years, because a lot of our challenges are embedded in legacy thinking on who we think the right talent really is. And so it was interestingly, embedded in old thinking, where we believe that the way you actually populate your internal audit team is by being able to bring in chartered accountants, fresh chartered accountants. And in fact, and I say this under, you know, an umbrella of what I call the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. So one of the stories we told ourselves about ourselves is that we were one of the largest recruiters of chartered accountants in the country, right? Because we brought in so many of them even to the audit function. And the presumption, of course, was that if you bring in people who've done 3 years of audit, they can come in and make a career in audit. Is that right? Well, that is wrong, because people who've done 3 years of audit actually don't want to do any more of audit. And we found over a period of time, what would happen with this group that would come in as trainees into the audit function is there would be a structured induction and whatnot for them, which was over a period of time. There's a lot of other kind of grooming and training that would happen. And there were some past year chartered accountants who would be their supervisors. And then there were some other laterally infused people who were also there within the organization and so on. And we'd find that invariably, no matter what ceremonies we did in year 1, year 2, we would typically, by the time we were in the 18th month, we would be left with less than 30% of the people that we'd hired. And so this was literally year on year, and then you'd go out and hire them again, and then you'd have literally almost the same story. And so, you know, I think this was coincided with my 3rd year within the organization, and a new audit head that really got sort of brought into the organization. And he questioned this and he said, you know, we have alarming attrition here. What is the story and why do these people not stay? And he said, do we want to figure what's really going on with this group? And the obvious one for me was that I think they already come in with audit and they're not interested in doing more audit, because invariably, before a lot of them left, they would reach out to our teams asking whether there was an opportunity. Our IGP required you to be in the same role for at least a minimum 2 years. And so they did not qualify for the IGPs internally, but they're very interested in going into the treasury roles or going and joining the M&A team if there was an opportunity. And they'd constantly ask for that before some of them eventually would put in their papers and move on. So, you know, we had a few suspicions on what we thought was going on, but we did a focus group to be able to understand. And bang on, you know, they didn't find audit very attractive, although they'd come in with their eyes open, knowing that the job was in audit. 2 is that they came in because they thought that it was a conduit to go to bigger things within the conglomerate rather than stay on with the audit team. And so we decided summarily that we're going back to the drawing board to see how do we want to populate our front line within the audit teams, and that we've definitely got something wrong, because you can well imagine, you know, we used to go out and get these CAs, and even the experienced ones would laterally come in and all of that. And there'd be fairly attractive compensation being paid to all of these people to be able to come in, and yet we'd not get, there was a program. I mean, we were checking all the boxes and yet not getting the retention we were looking for. And so here's what we did. I went back to the drawing board, say, well, what if we were hiring all over again? What would we really do with this function, right? And what came up was the following, right? We said, and I recommend all of you who are on the call today is start going back for each of your function, go back to the drawing board with your functional head. To be able to say, if we just didn't have any of the people we had right now, what would we do? Not just at entry level. This example of stories about largely entry level, but you know, do this for just about all levels in the organization. What would you really do for each of these functions if you were to start hiring afresh from today? And here's what we came up with. We said there's no reason why, because it was a manufacturing organization, you know, infrastructure manufacturing, there was an opportunity to be able to pick engineers on the IGP who were well versed with the plants, who might want a career shift into audit. So we opened it up to them, and a whole lot of them applied. The second group that we identified, we said, who would want to get groomed and make a career in audit? And we said, what about MCOM? So MCOM is a stream in the market. They don't have a lot of, you know, sort of opportunities. And so is there an opportunity to bring in MCOMs? And we put out a search for MCOMs to be able to see how many MCOMs are normally accountants somewhere. We tried figuring, would they be ready if they were in the first 3 or 4 years of their careers, interested in coming in to be able to become part of the audit team. And then we struck gold because we thought about how difficult it is to be able to pass your CA because the pass percentage is low. We said, what about CA interfail, which is a very large group, because CA has two groups, 2 parts, and more often than not, people clear the first 2 groups and then struggle to clear 3, 4. We say, is there a group of people who are CA interfail? Now, I'll tell you what, we have a negative connotation to anyone who's failed anything. Technically, a CA interfail has a BCom. as a graduation, but doesn't have a post-graduation, but has attempted to be able to become a CA. And you'll be surprised how many of them, because they've attempted the groups so many times, they're actually very astute accountants and auditors. So we actually went out and found them in large numbers. This is a very large talent pool, does not have opportunity in the market. And we brought them in. We created like a mix of CA Interfail, MCOM, and we brought in engineers who were well versed with our plants. We created like a group of this kind to be able to bring in as our first level talent, right? And of course they went through training and they went through a whole lot of other things, but what we ended up doing is we had straight 100% retention in the first 3 years. Excellent. Right? And even after that, when you did get a few moving, they were more moving out on the IGP and the rest of that. So I have to say that, suddenly we changed the game, because what this meant was, for the new leader who came in, he had a steady state frontline, all hungry to learn and hungry to make a career with a larger organization. If there were any upheavals at the mid-management level, he told us it didn't disturb him, because he had the troops who were ready to fight. And the top leadership knew that we had a very, very strong frontline to go out there, so they could get more ambitious with some of the projects and assignments that they wanted to be able to carry out within the organization. So they upped the ante on performance, did not have upheavals because of any exits at the mid-level. And we groomed a whole lot of talent, which we experimented with, and it turned out so beautifully well for the function that we could actually revamp and recast what this function did for the organization. And I've taken this as one example. There are many, but I want you to take away from it. There's such a rich example of how we brought in people and infused talent. I want you to particularly look at people who don't have opportunities in the market. And that's a hungry group. We tend to be very uncreative, very straight-jacketed on how we look for talent. It's always the goose for the goose and the gander for the gander. And if you suddenly disrupt this, you can open yourself up to a whole lot of talent in the market, which otherwise is not marketable and is very, very hungry. So I'm urging everyone, you don't just have an opportunity to make a difference to your own organization. You're sitting on making a difference to the society by giving opportunities to people who would otherwise not have opportunities. And of course, it requires going back and convincing people within the organization to experiment. But you're sitting on that space where you can recommend to people what else you can experiment with. And look, while we've got great success stories on all of our experimentations, maybe you fail some and you win some, but you must keep trying on being able to see what is my alternate talent pool. And, embedded in the story, it is the answer to your question, Yogesh, which is, how do I make this more strategic? I make it more strategic because I apply my own thinking to what will cause retention within the organization. What are the pools I have not yet explored? How can I create a rhythm within the organization where, if I give them the steady state that they require to be able to make an impact and a difference, this group can make that impact and the difference if we create a steady state environment on talent. Also, you find that a lot of groups, it's almost like the Hawthorne studies, you bring in focus to a particular group. I don't know how many people know the Hawthorne studies, but it's basically the underlying principle of that is that when you get focus and attention, you will improve and change your behavior. And it's the same as your 8th or your 9th standard lessons on heliotropy. You know what I mean? Plants grow in the direction of light. And so what do you give light to that will grow? And the fact that you work with these groups strategically in terms of giving them talent that will stay, you'll see that behaviors change, the way in which we treat people will change, the way in which they integrate within your organization will change, the way your leaders connect with these people will change, and you can actually manifest, retention. Right. Now, here's something that I want to say very quickly before you move to your next question, which is that, I remember, a very interesting debate in one of the organizations where we talked about how can retention be a measure that sits in the, the goal sheet of people in talent acquisition. There's a huge pushback saying, we have nothing to do with it. Once we've deployed these people, how do we influence retention? And I'll tell you what, the problem with measures and metrics is that we see blame embedded in it and not learning. We're living in times where it's important to have a growth mindset around measures and metrics. Measures and metrics are not to be able to pin down blame or to tell you how badly you've done. measures and metrics is so that it expands and opens up the windows to be able to understand and to be able to revamp, rechange, readjust readapt your policies around or your programs around how you're going to go about doing your jobs. So for example, when the retention data comes back to you, and if it's alarming, then you have a chance to not repeat what you're already doing. So you become a learning organization. You're then closing out the loop because you become an organization that does not do the same thing and expect a different outcome, which is the definition of madness, by the way. So the idea is, how do I change what I'm doing by being able to learn more from the data that I'm able to get within the organization? So retention data, hold yourself up to retention data to try and understand along the value chain, where have we missed the bus? And you know what? It's so easy to say that all of these people are restless. They want to change of scenario. They're just very difficult people to please. And so they've gone out looking for other pastures. And some people turn around and tell us, oh, they'll be back in some time. You know what I mean? They'll go around, they'll figure no one's putting up with them, and then they'll come back. Whatever that story might be, but you may want to learn. And maybe you decide that you don't need to change anything much, that most of it was in place. But you must, in these times, go back and have the courage to be able to figure along the value chain, where did we miss the plot? And how can we change, therefore, what it is that you're doing strategically in the area of talent acquisition?
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Banerjee. I just want to take a quick check on the time here, because we do want to leave a little bit of time for question answers. So for folks who are attending today, we have a quick poll. We just wanted to know which industries you come from. And while you're at it, you can actually drop your questions into the chat box right there, and Noel or I or Dr. Banerjee can help answer it. So the poll is up right now. We'll keep it up for another few more seconds. It'll be good to see where everyone's coming from. So before we get to the next question, Dr. Banerjee, so you sort of touched upon the concept of both of two follow-on questions that I had in terms of what does the value chain mean, and what do the metrics really mean for the TA professions as a whole. So curious about the latter. I'm just thinking, how can we as TA professionals really measure the impact of our actions? Retention was one measure that you spoke about, but beyond that, what other thoughts do you have, and how do you make sure that you're actually being creative in terms of your entire process and actually bringing some of those metrics down the stream?
Yeah, so I think I want to start by saying, even if you're not involved in the workforce planning process, and I know that undergoes changes many times during the year and so on, ask the questions that you really need to ask. And I think a great way in which you can add value within the organization and create opportunity, you're in times where you can demand voice, you can ask for engagement with the requisitioner so that you're able to understand better, is that I think if we had less authority bias in the organization, which is whatever seniors are telling us is right, therefore we go to just run and go execute that, I think we do really well. And therefore I would start by saying, we ask what's the nature of the role, what the person will be doing. And in your options now, is this a permanent job? Is this something that you can do part-time? Is this something that you can outsource? Is this a gig assignment? Can this be done in other formats? What are the formats of working? And then when you get down to what the background or experience of the person is, you can debate that to be able to see where can we find our alternate talent pools, right? And I think engaging in that conversation will be very meaningful, and asking a set of questions to your requisitioners will be really nice. So don't just run with a requisition form is my first advice to you, right? Figure the origin of it and figure what the responses to the questions are. Even if some of them are saying, why are you asking so many questions? Just go do your job. See, I actually do a better job for you if you answer and respond to these questions. So I think there is a lot of, being more than willing to coordinate and to become the order taker. And I'm saying that resist that temptation and instead ask a couple of questions. You can actually help the organization reduce costs, reduce the angst in terms of the format in which the person's working. You can basically, you can actually save costs very significantly if you decide on formats that are different from the permanent employee sort of format. So I think it's important to be able to explore all these before you actually bring people into the organization, because bringing them into the organization is a promise, and should be very, very careful about making that promise. So that's one. Two is what is the what is the opportunity you have with this position to be able to position your employer brand? And are you clear about the value proposition on why they should join you, which may be company X versus company Y, which is also in the competition fold? And you don't need to call out company Y, but you can call out why your company shines through in terms of opportunity, in terms of projects, in terms of clients, in terms of the learning opportunity, whatever else it is that is there in your set of value proposition, to be able to articulate that well and present it to potential candidates. Remember, every potential candidate is an opportunity to be able to rub off your employer brand on them in some way with your own behaviors, in the way in which you conduct yourself, and whether you do indeed have both the elevator pitch and the boilerplate. The boilerplate is what you say about your organization. Elevator pitch is maybe a conversation about yourself and a bit about what you have on offer in terms of the job role. So I think all of that, bringing that to the market and using that as an opportunity to be able to create a differentiated, hiring experience for the candidate is very important. You're such an important touch point of that. And if you ride roughshod around this interaction, then I'm afraid that, you will either get somebody who just wants a job, or you'll get somebody who doesn't care for this behavior because they have the same behavior. So I'm just trying to say it's important to be able to also set the standard or the sort of the bar on what it means to join your organization. The other part that I think is very important is how you do the entire process of being able to onboard people into the organization. And even as you hand over the baton to somebody internally, how well and smoothly that handing over of the baton is done. All of that is part of what your employer brand really stands for. And that's the experience that the person's first having inside the organization. I think that what is extremely important is to be able to track people you've brought in on board. I've seen very passionate talent acquisition professionals who really, really keep track of the people they've brought into the organization. They continue being the buddy, the friend, the person to help them integrate and to be able to start performing. They oftentimes act as navigators to help these candidates understand how to navigate the organization corridors and how to get connected, to understand who the stakeholders might really be. All of that so that you have one friendly face to go to, and it's oftentimes the person who hired you. So having some ownership for this person's candidature is great. I know people having told me in the past that the person who hired them to the organization didn't stay themselves, and that the person who hired them to the organization doesn't even recognize them when they are in the lift or in the corridors. I think that is a very, very, I think it's a very disappointing experience. I think I'd be very disenchanted with an organization where the person who hired me doesn't recognize me or doesn't acknowledge me within the organization after the job is done. So I've just been one head count, one number struck off the list, rather than a human being, a full-fledged human being who's coming on board. So many ways in which I think talent acquisition people can be able to, all of you on board can make a difference in terms of leaving an impact within the organization. And like I said, hold yourself up to those measures, metrics that Yogesh is talking about in terms of impact. So impact is, in terms of a measure, I would definitely say how fast you were able to get the person on board, whether you got the person the price points that the organization really wanted the person to be able to be brought in, that you've got the person in the format in which you wanted the person to be able to come into the organization, whether the onboarding was managed well and the person's comfortable and well poised within the organization contributing. And if the individual doesn't know how the organization's performance management process works, you've got that person integrated in that process by speaking to other people down the talent value chain to be able to make that happen. That the person stayed to be able to contribute to the organization's journey. And I think there's a reasonable count on what does it mean to stay to contribute to the organization's journey. No one's talking about being there lifelong, yeah. But the point is, I'd imagine 3 years is a reasonable time frame, and maybe 5, depending on which industry you're in. And of course, if they stayed longer to take on bigger jobs, it'd be fantastic. So for anybody who's become cynical around retention, let me just tell you, it's still not uncommon to have people who stayed with the organization, contributed towards growing the organization. And a lot of people that we work with through Capstone, when they're looking to be able to drive their growth agendas and their change agendas, often tell us that, they are open to, if they need to be able to replace a few people who are not quite pulling their weight, or, who've just been there because they've been there. And I can tell you the good news that most organizations drive their change agenda successfully with the same people. And so it's not necessary, is what I'm saying, that you need to have to remove people, or that because people have been there, for residency reasons, which is they just stayed for the organization longer. Maybe that's why they got certain positions and opportunities. I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning to not do anything in an organization. So I think it's important to tap on that energy and create cultures of contribution. So you can very significantly enable that. And I'm just going to poise that.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee. So we have a couple of really interesting questions. I know we have just 10 minutes left for the top of the hour, but one question that we have from Saba on the Q&A is that she is head of HR at her current company. And her question is around, how do you manage the leadership of the company to help her make new decisions in terms of improving existing processes? So she talks about modernizing HR processes, succession planning, and all of the typical questions that you might typically answer as head of TA, right? Mm-hmm. But there's always a resistance to change within the organization.
Yeah.
How do you overcome that within the leadership that you have, and what are your experiences? What are they?
Yeah, and this is not an uncommon situation. So I just want to let Saba know that many people in the same boat there. So if it's reassuring at all, but I think that I think the single biggest challenge within a lot of organizations is that they believe that the knowledge of talent or talent management ought to be with HR or with the person who's the talent head. So whoever is the talent head or the head of HR is there because they already know how to do this, or they understand what the the nuts and bolts on these programs might really be. There are so many best practices. We're in the knowledge era. It's not difficult to find this out. I think to manifest this, the real sort of talent managers are your line managers, and the more you educate them on how to go about doing this. And especially in current times, I mean, the 21st century belongs to the leader who knows how to achieve business results through people. And so through people is a very significant part of that agenda. And therefore, if you create very talent savvy and well-being savvy leaders who know how to combine compassion and accountability within organizations, which is, how can I be, most people believe that it's an either or, that if I'm kind to people or I'm human centric, it means I cannot drive for my results. And I think that if you resolve this dilemma, you'll be the leader of the 21st century, because the idea is, how do I learn how to lead in a different way? And I think this answer is bigger because we come from a command and control, sort of power centric ethos. And the hierarchy is something which it's an industry 1.0 phenomena. We still continue it into industrial revolution 4.0. So the hierarchy itself has certain perpetuating challenges in terms of power distance, and they get accentuated in power centric countries like ours. So I know where you're coming from, where there is this command and control style and this do as I say kind of style, not as do as I say and as I do. Lots of all these dichotomies in the way in which we lead people are common challenges. I'm going to leave you with 2 or 3 ideas which you may want to explore. One is that educate your line managers and your functional heads, make that a precondition to getting those jobs, which is that you understand what your organization means when it wants to manage talent, and that they are the custodians of employee experience, not the human resources function. And so they are actually manifesting employee experience. And so how they manage touch points on employee experience is what's going to enable things to happen. Also, the fact that you see, for example, take one talent decision like promotion, and how easily we give away promotions within organizations as if they're candy in a candy bar. We give promotions because we believe that, this person spent 2-3 years with the organization, time to promote the person. And, if we don't promote, somebody else will, and the market will get this person. So it's better to just give them a sense of movement. 9 out of 10 organizations have no mechanisms to groom people before they actually get these jobs. They are such important jobs. People manager is your most important job within the organization. It cannot be gifted to anyone. It also spells of myopia in terms of talent, because you're looking to manage this person's retention, perhaps at the cost of the cluster of people who are going to report into this person. You're not managing their retention, and you're in fact jeopardizing their retention at the cost of his retention or her retention. So people, not everyone's ready to become people manager. And it's very, very important to not gift away this job to people easily within the organization, and to educate line managers on issues of, for example, promotion, on how it is that you give promotions within an organization. Succession planning and development, which is part of business continuity planning, has often lapsed into just identifying some names in a list. And it's not names in a list, and are people who need to be groomed to take on these bigger jobs. So I think, just in the interest of time, I'll pause here to say there are strategic decisions, and you need to be able to involve, not just involve line managers, but get them to understand and educate line managers, treat them as the real talent managers, and basically get them to understand that they manifest employee experience.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee. I think we do have a couple of quick questions, but before we just get into the last couple of questions for the next 4 minutes, we have one more poll that we just quickly wanted to run on trying to figure out what is actually going to help TA teams on their recruitment process. So the poll should be up and running now. Please do, to the audience, please do provide your answers. Happy to learn from you and hear from you. So one of the questions that we got was around how is technology impacting strategic talent acquisition? And given that we are a technology company, I would say that we have something to say on that. Definitely, in terms of the kind of candidate pools that we can draw, the kind of engagement that we are able to build in, and how TA teams can reach out to recruiters. There's a lot to be said in terms of how technology is a great enabler, and it's a great tool in making sure that you're spending less time finding the candidate and more time engaging with the candidate. What's your take, Dr. Banerjee?
Yeah. So, I have something to say, and I know that the audience is very largely also from technology companies, and maybe a lot of you using technology to be able to hire candidates and so on. I just want to say something about technology in our times, because I think it's somewhere down the line gotten misinterpreted and therefore manifested in a manner which is not meaningful. So technology for the sake of technology is not useful for any organization. So technology that has lapsed into gizmoism, which is we have this and we have that, and they have bought, and the keeping up with the Jones, and somebody else has something, so let us get it as well. And the rest of that is not useful and not meaningful for any organization. Here's what I have to say. Technology is here to be able to make your search, or your ability to be, once you've identified what your criteria might be, it's there to be able to enhance efficiency. It may also help you to some degree reduce, repetitive work, and get you to use your time more meaningfully. So basically, by and large, on parameters of efficiency, productivity, and to some extent, improve quality, right? But there is no substitute, absolutely no substitute for all that I told you that you need to do before the process, and all that you need to do to manifest the process, and the yardsticks you use to be able to figure whether or not you've done a real fair job to find perhaps the best set of people in the market for the job. My suspicion is that the way in which a lot of these mechanisms finally manifest is that you give your requisitioner a set of people who could easily be the rest of the rest, and he or she is selecting from that rest of the rest. And your job's really to be able to give them the best of the best. And so is it enabling you to be able to do that, having gone through the conversations that I spoke about earlier, where you really do have an astute understanding of what the organization is looking for, and that none of your mechanisms of technology are reducing your access to the candidate or the conversations that you require to have with candidates, or the connection you need to make with candidates. If it's reducing that experience, then maybe your technology is not worth it. So I'm just simply going to say that if it's improving efficiency, reducing repetitive work, reducing the tediousness of having to do your job, by all means technology, but it must get you closer to your talent. And so if it's reducing connect, or it's reducing access, reducing conversations and dialogue, it's not a replacement for any of your strategic thinking, your astute plan on how it is that you're going to go about getting these people, and all the conversations you need to have so that you're able to engage, create connection, and get them to be able to understand your value propositions and your employer brand. It cannot replace any of those processes. And I want us to be mindful about how we use technology. Technology is a facilitator. It can also be a catalyst, but it does not replace human interaction, and we must continue upholding that.
Thank you so much. I think I know we're already at 4:00 over here in India, but maybe one last question, and this question's from Shruti. And her question's on, do you have any advice for startups, especially when in a scenario where candidates have multiple competing offers and they accept the offers but don't turn up on the day of the joining? So what can startups do to position themselves differently?
Yeah. So I think that a couple of things that I'm going to throw out there, because it depends on what you can afford and what you can't when you're a startup. And I know that while everyone's having many raw deals on their hiring experiences, the startups end up having some of the, I think, kind of you get seen at the end of the food chain sometimes in terms of sustainability of options. And there are also multiple options, even for somebody who wants to make a career in a startup. So I think, again, going to boil down to unique value proposition. What is your unique value proposition? My recommendation is that by and large, get the founders of the startup to talk to key talent, right? And so somewhere in your process, there is nothing more inspiring than knowing that I have the founder's vision from the founder, and therefore I buy and sign up for that. So I think don't replace the founder's engagement for the risks they take for joining a startup. And I think that a lot of us miss that boat, and we want to compare with other people in the market and so on. I think you've got to be able to create that upside of reward, which is what are you going to get for coming and risking your career working for an organization which you don't know whether they'll have funds, whether they'll have investors, whether they'll have the confidence of the investors, whether they take longer than what they've imagined to go to market, whatever those challenges might really be. What is your upside on reward? And the third one is, if you're asking people to come in on a yet evolving brand and bet their careers and their lives and their futures and their decisions and all of that onto that, and you're expecting high levels of ownership, accountability from them, how much of ownership are you willing to give them? And so if they're not going to be able to have an upside on also owning for the effort that you're asking them to put in, it's not very attractive. And I find that you cannot bring in best talent into startups unless you've answered some of these questions around people. But I think buying into the founder's vision is a good starting point. I believe even if you do the front, even if you do the initial screening, reviewing, whatever, early in the game, get a high quality talent to speak to the founders, but they buy into the founder's vision and leave it to the founder to use their magic to be able to get people to sign on. So just some tips for you to be able to make this happen. Involve people is what I'm saying. Don't do it alone. And you need that, an upside on reward. And don't forget that, because that is, finally, everyone needs an answer to what's in it for me. And you better have a very good answer for that. And don't just expect on goodwill and because the person needs a job, then you're just basically signing up in the short term to have someone come and do something for you. So I think build all of that. And you got to, I think another thing I feel very strongly about is that it's all very great to say, oh, it sounds so sexy to say, oh, we run a startup and all of that. I think you must have systems, processes within the organization that shout out louder than giving yourself the permission to call yourself a startup, which is chaotic. So I think that reduce that chaos, bring some system processes so that there is more belief in your intentionality to be able to achieve what you're saying your startup is out to achieve.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Banerjee. We do have a few more questions, but unfortunately, we're already at the top of the hour. And I really, really want to thank you for taking the time out today and talking to us. I also want to thank all of the attendees as well. We had over 200 people today, and we really look forward to having you all on our next webinar, which we should be announcing shortly, and continuing on the RecRoute series. So once again, thanks everyone. Really appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Noel. Thank you, Sunit.
Thank you. Thank you, Yogesh. Thank you, the entire foundit team and the audience. I mean, you've been wonderful, lovely, very busy chat with lots of questions. So all the best, everyone. And keep having fun. And thank you, Foundit, for all that you're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Sujaya. It was absolutely fantastic.
Right.
All right. So thank you so much, Yogesh. You've been absolutely fantastic as a host. We'll also look forward to the participants in terms of, looking forward to their feedback too. So please do take the feedback, guys, once the session probably closes. It was an absolute pleasure. And we look forward to another action-packed session the next time. So this is Noel and Yogesh signing off from Foundit. Take care of yourselves and have a brilliant week ahead. Thanks a lot.